Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this evening's live stream. Now, I've got a few things lined up tonight, and as usual, there'll be a chance for questions and some interaction. Now, I was hoping to have a very special guest tonight, but we haven't quite been able to line that up. So hopefully he will appear maybe next week or the week after. But watch this space. It will be, say, an extremely interesting, very special guest. I won't say any more than that for the time being, but that's something to look forward to. So what have we got for this evening? Well, we had a meeting of the leadership team of the Scottish Family Party on Tuesday evening, last night, in fact, and we talked about some plans that we've got for the future. So I thought you might be interested to hear a little bit about those in some more detail. Then I've got some news items. There's a few questions that came in as well. I've got the latest magazine from the General Teaching Council of Scotland. So there's various things we can have a look at tonight, as I say, and I hope that there'll be comments coming in as well with questions and things to discuss. Right, so our plans. I thought I'd share some of these with you. We're actually having a meeting next week, an open meeting online for members, where members can come in and discuss these plans, offer their own suggestions, feedback on things, etc. So if you're interested in doing that and you're a member or become a member in order to do that, then watch out for your email, and there will be a link to join in the meeting. I think it's next Tuesday. So what have we got in the pipeline? Well, we talked about a conference. We had our first ever conference of the Scottish Family Party in 2019. I would say there was a smash hit, a real buzz to it. We had 100 people there. But that's 2 years ago, and the party is far more than twice as big as it was then. So we'll hope for a much bigger event. We're looking at November the 13th as a likely date, somewhere in central Scotland, probably. We might make it, maybe in a hotel, so if people want to stay over the night before or the night after, that will be available. We're also looking at the possibility of maybe having a meal at the hotel in the evening, entirely optional if people want to stay on after the conference to have a sort of semi-formal dinner. Then we'll have that. So preparations are underway for a conference. So the last one I think was really good. It was a big step forward for us, and this will be another big step forward. So 13th of November, you can pencil that in your diary. Now, the questions that people submitted, I think this question was put on YouTube. Someone said, what about the council elections next year? What are our plans for those? Well, our plans are underway. Michael Willis, our chairman, is leading our campaign for the council elections. We had a meeting a couple of weeks ago online. I think there were about 30 odd people came along to that. So we need people willing to be candidates and to support that campaign. And we think it's a good opportunity for us, because with a council election, the ward that you stand in is quite small, and it's small enough that one person can really make a difference. I mean, in a Scottish election or a general election, okay, you can knock on doors, but to actually get through a decent proportion of the whole constituency, you've got to do an awful lot of knocking on doors. But in a council election, you really can make an impact, and turnout is so low. I mean, I think it can be like 20 and 30%. So most people don't vote. So if you can persuade people to vote, if you know people already within the ward, then that can be a big advantage, and that can go a long way towards putting you in with a chance. Most wards in the council elections, they have, I think it's 3 or 4 councillors get elected. So effectively, you can get elected by coming 3rd or 4th within a ward. So we're going to see what we can do. So we're looking for people who are really committed to that, committed over the long term. So for months and months leading up to the election, they can be working away, trying to get known in their community, finding out about local issues, developing local policies. And yeah, we'll see where we get. So we're going to have candidates around Scotland, not in every ward, because that would be, who knows, hundreds and hundreds of candidates. But we will have candidates around Scotland where we've got people keen to come forward and to do that. So if you're interested in that, do get in touch. You can email chairman@scottishfamily.org, chairman@scottishfamily.org. What other plans did we talk about? We looked a bit further ahead. How about the 2024 general election? Assuming it's going to be on time then. Well, we thought about our plans for that as well. And it would be good. Our target would be to have a candidate in every constituency for that election. That will cost quite a lot of money. But that means we could have another leaflet to the whole nation. And I think it really would cement us as the biggest of the small parties by quite a margin. So that's a target for 2024. So we will work towards that. And then the year after that is the Scottish elections again. Right, what other plans are hatching? This live stream, as I've been saying it for a few weeks, we're going to develop it and make it more into a multi-part show. And there's various ways that we're going to do that. But one of them, well, obviously that will involve more people taking part. And I found out that virtually all the people that are willing to take part and help making the program, they can't actually make a Wednesday. So at some point before too long, we might make the switch to a Tuesday. I'm pretty sure we are going to switch to a Tuesday. So watch out on our social media to see how that would work. Now, another possibility as well is we're wondering about moving it later. So if you think maybe a 9 till 10 slot would be better, then I'd be interested to hear from. In fact, if you want to put comments in now, if you think a 9 till 10 slot would be better, part of the thinking is if you've got something on in the evening, the kids are in bed or you've done whatever else you've got to do, 9 till 10 is a more relaxed, sit back and watch something or listen to something rather than earlier in the evening. So we'll listen to what people say about that. But say, comment now if you want to give a view. What else were we planning? Well, we're going to try and have some local meetings around the place before the summer holiday. They'll have to be very small, obviously, because of the restrictions. But then after the holiday, we're hoping to really get things geared up and to have some proper publicized events around the country again. It's been very frustrating. We haven't been able to do that for a long, long time. But we will try to be on tour again with local branches, organizing events, and various of the leadership team will be going and speaking and contributing to those. So we're really looking forward to that. So those of you who are new to the party, that will be a really good opportunity to come along and meet people probably for the first time. So as we move into September, late August, September, you'll see a program of events coming out. What else have we got in the pipeline? Well, we've had this leaflet for a couple of years. It's been our standard family party leaflet. Right, we've decided this leaflet's sort of had its day now, and we're going to produce some new ones. But not just one. We're going to produce a set of leaflets. One maybe some more general as an introduction to the party. Another one maybe a little bit more hard-hitting. And other ones on particular topics. So, for example, assisted suicide is going to come along in this parliament. We'll make a leaflet on that. Maybe one on abortion. Maybe a leaflet specifically designed for Christians, or one particularly for Catholics, or maybe one for Muslims, or whatever. So some more specialist things. Maybe a leaflet on education. Maybe a leaflet where a member of the Scottish Family Party just tells their story. Have the face on the front and have a bit more of a personal element to it. So that's some of the plans we've got up our sleeves. So watch this space. And we're planning to launch these new publications at our conference in November. Right, social media. The big news on social media is Facebook is our friends again, because our page had been restricted for months and months and months. And now the election's finished, they've unrestricted it, and it's now reaching the sort of numbers of people that it really ought to. And we've got over 10,000 likes on the Facebook page. So posts should be reaching, 5 or 10,000 people quite routinely, which they now are, which is brilliant. Before, when it was restricted, they'd be reaching 1 or 2,000. I mean, a fraction of what they should be. So now we're hoping to see growth on Facebook, and it's good that we're able to use that again. We talked about YouTube videos, on how some of the things that I made a video, say 2 years ago, responding to something in the news a couple of years ago. Maybe we now need a new video on that topic, not so much responding to what's in the news, but just laying out our policy and our principles. So that's what we're going to do. Phil Holden, our deputy leader, is going to help with some of those. So there'll be videos on the way. Instagram is growing quite nicely. TikTok, not so good. We've been completely banned from TikTok during the election campaign. We were banned a few times, actually. We only put about 5 videos up, but it was enough to get us completely banned. So we might have another try at that with some time. I think with TikTok, we just make an account, It operates for a couple of weeks. We get banned. We'll make another one. We get banned again. And we shall see. We shall see. We talked about finances of the party, or the income of the party is increasing very nicely, especially we've had a lot of new members over the election period. So we're talking about that. And I mean, what's on the cards now is for the family party basically to start paying me a modest salary. I've been working on the family party basically at my own expense for almost 3 years, and I can't do that forever. So the family party is going to start paying me a modest salary before too long. What else did we talk about? We talked about the election that's just gone. We talked about our youth wing as well. We have got a youth group that's met online, and that's something we're keen to develop in the future. So that's something we will be looking at in the future. By youth, we mean sort of up to 25, or even up to 30. So we're looking at how to really get that moving. Now, all those things, I say, if you want to chip into these discussions about our plans for the future, there's a meeting on Tuesday night. If you're a member, you'll get an email with the link. If you're not a member and you'd like to chip in and be involved, then obviously join up. Go to our website, sign up, and you could take part in those. So, right, let's have a little look at the comments before I go on to why were you deleting my comment? Why were you deleting my comment on your video? Right, it might be because it was really offensive, possibly. I'm not sure. Right, debate me. Okay, then put something on and I'll respond to it. Right, so John, kids are in bed by 9, right? That's someone 9 till 10 sounds good. Okay. That would be good. Actually meeting people again. Absolutely. Yep. Looking forward to seeing you again. Right. We're going to modify our logo for Pride Month. That's a joke, I assume. That's not something that was in our plans. Right. I think that's that for now. Okay, on to a few news items. So keep questions coming in. Right, the abortion figures for last year have been published, I think maybe today even, or yesterday. So we've got a report about those. Significant increase from last year that people are saying a lot of it will be linked to the DIY home abortion system that's been introduced. So last year, 13,815. So I was in the habit of saying 12,000 abortions a year. Then I had to update it to 13 and a half. And now for rounding off, I've now got to update it to 14,000 abortions a year. So the trend is definitely upwards. 20% increase in late-term abortions performed at 20 weeks or later gestation. Number of repeat abortions increased by 10%. And the main increase, which age groups was that in? Well, that's interesting. It's in 25-year-olds and upwards is where the increase has been. Now, I haven't seen any analysis of that, but let me take my initial sort of intuitive stab at why that's happened. I would guess that's because teenagers, etc., have maybe been seeing each other less. So there's been less, teenage and, student age, whatever sex going on. So that's resulting in less abortions in those groups or no growth in those groups. Whereas the older groups, maybe that's where the at-home abortion, that simplification of the process might have led to more people seeking an abortion. That's my guess there. This article reminds of a story in England where a case where a woman had the at-home abortion medication. I don't know if medication is the right word, drug or whatever. And the police opened a murder investigation into the death of a baby who they believe was born alive despite her mother taking DIY home abortion pills. I mean, that story just illustrates how confused the morality of our society is, doesn't it? Where you can have a murder investigation based on the killing of a baby that the woman was trying to kill perfectly legally with the state's assistance at an earlier stage. I mean, that's pretty confused, doesn't it? Now, I had a question on this topic as well. Someone asked, with the abortion issue, do you think it's best to take a gradualist or an absolutist approach? So when it comes to Parliament, if say, we had some MSPs in the Parliament, what would we put forward? Would we try to put forward a bill saying reduce the time limit down to 20 weeks in line with other European countries? Or would we try and put forward something that says just basically stop abortion apart from in particular extreme circumstances? So gradual or absolute? Well, that's an interesting question. There's 2 points I think about that. The first one is that maybe the gradual one might be the only thing that you're able to do in the Parliament. Because to put forward a bill in the Parliament, you can't just do it on your own. Like, say, a couple of Scottish Family Party MSPs couldn't put forward a bill saying stop abortion completely. What you would need is an MSP or two from other parties to be supporting it as well in order to put it forward. So it might be that a gradual step might be the only thing that you can actually achieve. Now, the other side of the story is I would worry that the problem is if you say, look, we want to reduce the time limit, it sort of makes it sound like you're agreeing with some pro-abortion people who feel that abortion gets worse and worse the closer the child is to birth. Whereas the logic of it precludes that view. I mean, human life is precious at every stage, equally precious at every stage. The value of a human life is one human life. It doesn't get added to or subtracted from, depending on how big it is and what stage it is and what it looks like or whatever. So I've got a lot of time for the absolutist approach. The other good thing with absolutist approach is it moves the debate to where it really needs to be. Okay, is this a human life? Is human life valuable? And that's really the core of the argument. So I personally would veer towards the absolutist position to try and really get the focus onto the core of the debate. So that would be my answer to that. All right, have we got any questions? Right, I'll just say to Lime, I mean, that's the Lime, I mean, we're just so bored of that so-called joke. Anyway, right. My wife is a stay-at-home mum, so I can't get shared parental leave, only 2 weeks paternity leave. Okay, wife is a stay-at-home mum, so I can't get shared parental leave. Right, I'm not quite sure of that situation. So you're saying if both parents are working, then, yeah, okay, so if both parents are working, there's an element of parental leave that can be shared between the mother and father as they wish. You're saying because your wife's a stay-at-home mum that you can't take a share of parental leave. Right, I don't really, can you fill me in a bit more about the system for that? I'm not exactly sure how that works. That is an interesting question, and I would like to know more about it to understand that, because that sounds like something that's, well, I suppose the other way of thinking about it is as though your wife is automatically taking all of the leave. Yeah, but I'd be interested to find out more about that. Tell us a bit more. Put a bit more detail in a comment. We'll have a look. Right, you have my vote. Excellent. Right, that's a good question. All right, Mary Lucas, whoever she is. Right, should the law change first, or should public opinion change first? All right, what do you think of that one? What do you think of that one? Now, really, in a democracy, the law is never going to be too far out of sync with public opinion. And in a democracy, really the law isn't going to change without significant support of the public as well. Now, you may think lots of things get passed into law that are basically unpopular in the country, but there's got to be a closer run thing than it is with abortion at the moment. So does public opinion need to change first? To a degree, yes, it does. But I think it's a two-way process. So if, for example, let's say the Scottish Family Party has got a couple of MSPs and they managed to put forward a bill about reducing time limits for abortion with a couple of MSPs from other parties, and that becomes a national debate. During that national debate, I think public opinion would shift, and it wouldn't shift in the pro-choice direction because People have already heard all that argument before. You've heard it all before. It's everywhere. The BBC preaches it to you routinely, whereas the pro-life side, people are not familiar with that. That's new. So I believe that every debate that happens, more people are going to move towards the pro-life side. So I think it's a two-way thing. So I certainly wouldn't say, oh, forget about trying to change the law. Let's try and change public opinion first, because trying to change the law is an important part of trying to change public opinion. Now, that applies, I think, with the Scottish Family Party to lots and lots of issues. It's not that we're going to get people elected and be able to pass the laws that we want. That isn't going to happen in the shorter term. But what can happen is that we open up debates in the nation and it shifts public opinion. When public opinion shifts, then that will be reflected in the democratic process, and then change could come along. So, right, that was a good question. Right, what have we got next? Why can't you find a vegan who's anti-abortion these days? They're only pro-life if you have fur, fins, or feathers. Good question, right? Does anyone know a vegan who's anti-abortion? There's no reason for that. There's no logical contradiction between vegan and anti-abortion, but I would imagine typically you're probably right, and that's an interesting challenge to put to people. Right. Right, I didn't read all this one, so I've got it. That says, so in the US, conservatives have finally been expressing their views since Trump gave them a voice. How large a percentage of Scots might have conservative views but are scared to express them? Right, I'll answer the second part first. If we look at, for example, the pro-life issue, what proportion of Scots are basically pro-life to one degree or another? I think, looking at polls I've seen, it's sort of between 10 and 20%. If the question is something like, do you think that the time limit should be lowered, then you're up to a very substantial portion of the population. So it's hard to nail down, but it's a substantial portion of the population is pro-life to some extent. Maybe not a majority, but a substantial portion. If you look at other things as well, I mean, same-sex, but the Scottish Family Party doesn't have a policy on same-sex marriage. Okay, lots of people say that we do, but we don't. But I mean, same-sex marriage, you would think that's pretty well universally accepted now, wouldn't you? But if you look at opinion polls, there's still, a substantial portion, 20-30% or whatever, who disagree with it. So I think there is a very substantial minority that is unrepresented in the parliament, and they're still unrepresented in the parliament, but let's see what happens in the future. Now, you say in the US, conservatives were given a voice. Now, I would say conservatives in the US have always had a voice. Previous Republican, in particular, presidential candidates have had very conservative views. There's conservative media, there's conservative commentators, there's a very lively conservative scene. In fact, in America, there is, as they call it, a culture war, because there's the conservative and liberal side, and that's a very public and political debate that goes on. And people in Britain, they often say, oh, we don't want a culture war like they have in America. And I always think, no, we do. Yeah, that's exactly what we want. Maybe not in the style of America, but that's what we want. Because at the moment, we haven't got a culture war because we've got a culture rout. Just one side just wins all the time, and the other side just runs away and retreats. So a war would be a great improvement on that. So I wouldn't say that Trump uniquely gave them a voice. I could talk about Trump a bit more, but I will probably leave that there. So that's my take on that one. So come back to me if you want to come back on that one. Right, Catholic education, criticism of Catholic education. Now that's, are you going to sort out the terrible state of Catholic education? My children attend Catholic school and I had to leave a job at Catholic school due to absolute frustration. Now that's interesting. My usual view is the Catholic schools are basically better in general than the mainstream state schools in terms of sort of ethic and values. I think they're better in a lot of ways. But on the other hand, I do hear a lot of Catholics saying that they're disappointed at the amount of compromise that there is in Catholic schools as well. Now, I think the situation with Catholic schools is, roughly speaking, I'm sure this is not said explicitly, but they realize the deal is, right, the government says, we fund you, so you toe the line and do things the way we want. And if you don't, well, that could be the end of the road. Now, my view, I think, is that maybe Catholic schools have got a bit more bargaining power than they realize. Even the Greens have backed off the idea of stopping Catholic schools. Their education spokesman, Ross Greer, during the election campaign, he was quite explicit to say, in the past, maybe the Greens have sounded like we want to abolish Catholic schools, but that's completely wrong. We think they're a good thing and we want to sustain them. I'm not sure they really do believe that, but that's what they're saying. So I think Catholic schools have got more clout than they think. And I think the government would be more frightened of them, of upsetting that contingent than, yeah, anyway. So I think the Catholic schools could be a bit bolder, could be a bit more confident. So generally, I think they are better. In terms of the details in your particular experiences, I'd need to know a bit more detail about those. Right, coming back to this shared parental leave. If we were both taxpayers, we could share her time off. Right. Okay. But I suppose the deal there, I mean, the equivalent would be, if the system applied fairly, that would mean that your wife could go and work and pay tax for a few weeks while you had time off at home. So that would seem like the fair application of the scheme to your situation, but I'm guessing that that's not what you're wanting. So I need to think this through more. But at the moment, I'm not sure I can see why that's unfair, because you've made the decision to have one parent at home. But come back to me if you disagree. Come back to me. Maybe I'm missing something on that. Right, that's interesting. Look, Charles, changing the law actually affects how people think. Now, if we come back to the abortion issue, I think that's absolutely true. Let's look at, say, the smacking ban. In the smacking ban debate, in the media, I would say there's pretty even coverage. Probably the majority were in favor of it, but there were, a substantial number of people were willing to stand up and say, no, we don't think this is necessary. We don't think it's a good idea. Whereas, how far on are we? A year on, 2 years on from it? What do you think the opinion now is? I think we're now at the stage where if you say I'm against the smacking ban, people just think, you're somewhere close to a child abuser. You're just beyond the pale. So you're right. Changing the law really does change perceptions in society, but within reason. So with abortion, I mean, let's say only 40% of the population was pro-life, but there were real severe restrictions placed on abortion. Then the population would tend to come round to that to some extent. So yeah, but I think if that's 40%, if it's only 20%, then it's too much of a stretch. Public opinion needs to be somewhere close to the law. And then you can introduce the law and that might influence public opinion a bit more as well. But public opinion needs to be not too far divorced from where the law is for it to work. Life is a right, not a privilege. I haven't heard that line before, but that's a great line. That's a good one. Oh, Barack Obama's back. Okay, welcome, sir. Right, what else I've got? Smacking is proven to negatively affect children's mental health. Why would you want to support that if you care about families first? Right, proven. Proven, that's an interesting word to use. I mean, technically speaking, the only area of academic endeavor that you can prove things is some maths or possibly philosophy as well. So even in the hard sciences, it's overstepping the mark, technically speaking, to describe something as proved. When you go into social science, use of the word proof is, well, it's been used very, very loosely. So proven to negatively affect children's mental health. Right, I would disagree with that. There are a lot of problems with research into smacking. just to give one of them as an example. So if you take a group of 100 children and say, right, put your hand up if you were smacked when you were a child, and let's say half of them put their hand up, and then you look at their behavior now, say, at this a year later or whatever, or just at the present time, which group will have the worst behavior? The ones who are smacked or the ones who are not smacked? Now, let's say it's the ones who are smacked. People could then say, oh, you see, smacking makes them bad. Smacking makes the behavior worse. Whereas the more obvious connection is the kids whose behavior is bad get smacked. Therefore, in the future, there's likely to be more behavior among ones of that temperament in any case. So whether or not the smacking helped or didn't help is very difficult to tease out. But this is a classic example of something coming from the world of sociology. What's the political outlook within sociology departments and social science departments in universities around the English-speaking world in particular? What's their outlook? It is overwhelmingly, crushingly, almost totally left, liberal, secular. And they view their academic discipline as part of a political campaign. So their raison d'etre as sociologists is to advance this left, liberal, progressive political agenda. And that's what they do through their research. And within social science, if you've got control of how to set up your experiment, what to publish, what not to publish, etc., then basically, I mean, pay researchers and you get research. And you can get the research results that you want to. So I would say smacking is not proven to negatively affect children's mental health. Here's another piece of data that might contradict that. What's the situation at the moment with youth mental health? Is it good? Is it improving? Never been better? No. You could say deteriorating and possibly never been worse. So how does that correlate with smacking? Are kids smacked more than ever before? No. No. I mean, if you go back decades when physical punishment of children was much more common, then I would say children's general mental health and well-being seem to be a lot better. They seem to be a lot more resilient. So I don't accept that point. Now, it's interesting the way you make that point. It's a real sort of morally superior way you make it. You don't care. I'm a good person. I really care. You obviously don't care about them. I mean, can you not accept that people can have different understandings of what produces the best benefit for children? Can you not see that that's the actual difference rather than some people don't care? Anyway, just to clarify, to finish off on that one, the Scottish Family Party's policy is to repeal the smacking ban. It should be up to parents. The Scottish Family Party's policy is not to recommend smacking children or to discourage smacking children. That's up to parents to decide how they're going to discipline their own children. Right. Right. I think we'll just say goodbye to Barack Obama. Right. I think hopefully he'll be eliminated now. I think we'll say goodbye to Lyme as well. Farewell. Oh, wrong one. Right, that one. Mental health wasn't researched that thoroughly 100 years ago. I'm not talking about 100 years ago. I'm talking about 30, 40, even 20, maybe even 10 years ago. So I think we know a lot about it then. And I don't think research is the only way to know about what's happening. There's a lot of ways of assessing the state of mind of young people rather than actually looking at research. Right, Becca's coming up. Many studies have shown that physical punishment, including spanking, hitting, or other means of causing pain, can lead to increased aggression, antisocial behavior, physical injury, and mental health problems. Right, for the reasons I said, I disagree with that. I stated one problem with the research, but there are lots of other problems with it as well. Another problem with research into smacking is it often fails to distinguish between smacking and like beating, basically. So it tends to lump them together. And that's the problem. The other thing, when you're doing research on this, let's say you've got a tiny proportion of parents who do, abuse their children, beat their children, or whatever. And then you've got a much bigger section of parents who will give the child a smack when they've been naughty. Now, when you do your research and you say to the parents, do you A, abuse your children by beating them up, or B, give them a reasonable smack when they're naughty, or C, not do that at all? I mean, who's going to take A? Obviously, nobody is going to take A. And so in your research, people who do that generally tend to get lumped in with the parents who use smacking perfectly reasonably. I mean, the other thing is, what's happening to the behavior of children? Can you find me a teacher that says, the behavior of children has just been improving and improving? The children who arrive in my primary school, they're now so obedient and easy to manage, because they've obviously been taught in their younger years that, no means no. And if you're told to do something, you just have to go along and do it and be cooperative. And so, children are increasingly really great in that regard. You heard that? No. Right. Personal belief: if a parent feels the need to smack their child, they failed as a parent. Right. Do you really want to say that? Do you really want to say to me, for example, that I failed as a parent? Is that really what you want to say? Some people have better ideas of how to raise their child is a terrible argument. I mean, why someone failed as a parent? I mean, the concept of punishment is quite straightforward. Punishment is adding an artificial consequence to a wrong action, a bad action, if you like, in order to, for the reasons that it's just people who've done something wrong shouldn't get away with it. They deserve some form of punishment. The other thing, it then deters them from doing that again. So the next time they're thinking, I'm just going to do that thing again, something in them will say, hang on a minute, didn't work out too well last time, so I won't do it this time, which can then help them to develop good habits. And the other thing is, the process of the punishment also can help people to understand how serious the issue was. Because if a child does something that's really bad and sort of nothing much happens, they'll tend to think, maybe that wasn't really that serious. Whereas a punishment can underline that actually was a big deal, and it gets that message through. Right, what form should that punishment take? Well, there's various forms it can take. There's the naughty step, there's sending to the room, there's not letting them have screen time, or whatever. There's various things you can do. The advantage with a smack, I would suggest, is there's instant and over with, rather than having it drawn out over a very long period of time. And I think a lot of parents have found that where other things don't work, sometimes a smack can be the thing that brings the child to their senses and solves the problem and reins them in. And that could be an important part of the learning process. I don't know about you, but on occasions you'll see parents with particularly young children, and it will seem a real struggle. The children are a real handful. The parents are really stressed. Some of the kids don't seem very happy as well. It's just all fraught and pretty unpleasant. Whereas sometimes you think if the parent just right, enough's enough, okay, a bit of a smack, that could bring it under control. So I'm presenting that side of the argument, and so to suggest that they failed as a parent, I would really urge you to reconsider whether or not you really want to make such an accusation against people. How can you distinguish between child smacking or beating? In a court of law, a parent could go virtually any extent and label it under the guise of discipline. No, that's not right. The previous definition, before the smacking ban was introduced, was very clear. It was very clear, but I can't quite remember it completely. But it said something like, it can't use an implement, it can't involve shaking. I think it said it can't be blows to the head, and it shouldn't leave a mark as well. Now, as far as I was concerned, that definition seemed pretty adequate to me. I thought that covered it pretty well. Yeah. reasonable and unreasonable chastisement. I think that might be the English terminology rather than in Scots law. But yeah, that distinction is certainly made. Right, I've got lots of questions coming in. So where are we? Okay, the best way to discipline children than hit them, in my view. I would say great, then that's entirely up to you to bring up your children using different methods, if that's what you want to. That would be my opinion there. So I'm not trying to advise people. I'm just trying to balance the discussion out. Right, opinion on gay relationships and education. We'll leave that for now. Instant and over with. If you think physical harm is an acceptable deterrent for bad actions and a preferable alternative, why don't we punish murderers by beating them? Right. Well, we have different standards for children and adults in lots and lots of different ways. Now, there is the children's liberation movement that says the same standards should apply to adults and to children. So what do you do with murderers? They stand trial and then you lock them up for many years in prison. So for a young child, I mean, should those adult standards be applied? I mean, should they be sort of locked up and isolated for long periods of time? No, that would be completely inappropriate for a child, wouldn't it? So I think the argument that adults and children should be treated in the same way, I think leads to some very strange conclusions. And my view is that adults, particularly the relationship between parents and children, is very, very different than other relationships, such as the state and an individual through the criminal justice system. So why don't we punish murderers by beating them? I would suggest because it's insufficient. It's not a sufficient punishment for murderers, because murder is so serious. It needs a much more serious punishment and long-lasting punishment than that, I would suggest. Parents not smacking have failed. They cannot control their children. Really? Really? Do you really want to make that point? Do you really want to make that blanket condemnation of all parents who smack their kids? In other words, if you look at previous generations, then you're talking about virtually all parents. They've just failed. They can't control their kids. Really? I mean, does that just apply to having to use any punishment at all? I mean, have they failed? Well, why is it a failure to have to use a punishment? I mean, has the state failed when it has to give people fines because they drive too fast? Has it failed just to communicate the wisdom of driving sensibly? So having to punish people is a failure. Well, you sort of could see it in that way, I suppose, but it is inevitable as well. Every human society has known that it's necessary to use punishments in some situations. And I think that's particularly, well, it's equally important to children. Those punishments are very small scale and they're not long lasting, but it's still a really important part. Right, we've got lots on this topic. Let's see what's next. It depends on the way physical discipline is administered and on the child. Of course, lashing out or hitting randomly is not an example of good discipline. Absolutely, that's quite right. I've answered that one. Right. I'm just trying to find the comments. Right, so my logical inconsistency. Which logical inconsistency? Let's see if I can find a mention of that. Right, I'm not sure which one that is. If you want to put that in another comment, I can respond to that. Belt or cane in schools? No. Why do I not support that? Partly because I think if schools have got a full range of other sorts of punishments, I don't think it's necessary. And I also think if you take that outside of the parent-child relationship, then I think the possibility for it going wrong becomes far higher. Now, during my teaching career, I mean, smacking in schools was banned when I was a pupil. But I've spoken to older teachers who can remember the time when caning, etc., was in place in schools. And they did feel that some teachers could be a bit sadistic and unpleasant, whatever about it. So no, I do not support any return of corporal punishment to schools. Right, someone again saying I'm misunderstanding. I'm not sure what I've misunderstood. If you want to make that clearer, I'd be interested to see that. So the comments thread tends to leap around when I try and scroll through it. So let's see. You're saying physical punishment is good, but then look at Norway's prison and justice system. The reoffending rate is something like 20%. Right, not exactly sure. So your point is that there's very little repeat offending. If you look at certainly within Sweden, when they were one of the first countries to ban smacking, and the increase in like child-on-child violence was astronomical in the years following that, astronomical, and that's quite a serious problem in Sweden. And I would suggest that that is not unrelated. Right, here's something different. What's this about? Right, Samantha. Right, would there be major funding by the Scottish Family Party into safeguarding and caring for children of the thousands of mothers who would have otherwise have had an abortion if the law was changed to make them illegal? You often hear about the detrimental effects that the care system has on children in adults. Right, would there be major funding safeguarding and caring for children of the thousands of mothers who would have otherwise had an abortion? Right, so assuming that these mothers are not going to keep the children, okay, and in some cases with the right support, I think a lot of mothers would choose to keep the children with more appropriate counselling, possibly. So if the children are going to be taken, I think the ideal is adoption, obviously, and the ideal within adoption is adoption within a married man and a woman. So you're approximating natural family life as closely as possible. So that's the ideal. So I think families that do adopt children are doing a fantastic thing. I think that should be recognized more in society and could be encouraged more as well. So I think that's a wonderful contribution to society. Children going into local authority care, I mean, as you say, their outcomes sadly are very, very poor in general. I mean, they really face a lot of problems, which underlines the importance of family life, because it just shows how things don't work out so well in the absence of it, despite the fact of people working so hard to try and replace the family, if you like, professionals working so hard. It still basically doesn't replace it. So in terms of spending money on the problem, I'm not sure the issue is really that care homes are under-resourced, but certainly encouraging adoption would be a very valuable thing to do. And I think a bit of a culture shift towards adoption, maybe to some extent away from fertility treatment. So if couples are having difficulty conceiving, if the option of adoption was valued, celebrated, promoted more in our society, maybe more of those couples might choose that as an option. I think that would be a positive thing for the children. I think with all that sort of issue, the priority needs to be the children. We need to try and gear things so things work out best for the children. Yeah, so thanks for that question. Immeasurable, really immeasurable. Can't give you a figure at the moment. Right. Like enter all infertility treatments on the NHS, at least until the very last child in care being placed in a home with the family. Right, that is an interesting perspective. That's not Scottish Family Party policy. I would say that's a view that there is an argument for it. I'm not sure that argument outweighs other arguments. You can also understand that couples who want to have their own children, which I think is a very natural and good desire, and if there's some barrier to that can be overcome medically, then I think that's a good thing to do. I think that is a health treatment. If that's to do with some biological aspect not functioning as it ought to, and the healthcare can help overcome that problem, then I think that's a good thing. But certainly the spirit of wanting to increase the number of children, to maximize the number of children benefiting from like two-parent privilege, if you like, having a mum and a dad, then that's something we should try to do. The ideal adoption is to a family who will love and care for them, heterosexual or not. If you want women not to have abortions, that is. Right. I assume the point here is that you need all the non-heterosexual families in order to cater for all these extra children. They're going to need care. See, I'm not sure how many of these extra children there would be, because I think a lot of the cases the mothers would be able to care for their own children. But the situation at the moment with regard to adoption is that a lot of, a substantial number of adoptive parents who would be excellent apply and are rejected, or they don't even bother applying because they know they would be rejected because they hold sort of conservative values. I mean, I've known Christian couples who are brilliant parents who go through the adoption process. They're often successful, but it's pretty stressful going through it. And they have some pretty tense conversations with the social workers where they have to balance up. Do I say what I really believe, and this child stays in a local authority care home and their future is not necessarily particularly bright? Or do I not say what I believe, and then this child can have a much rosier future in our family? And that's a pretty difficult dilemma, isn't it? Now, this is different from the usual case. Usually it's, do I speak out and pay the price personally? Where this is a case where I say, do I speak out and this child pays the price? Not because of your action, but because of the social workers' actions. So then that's one problem that could be sorted out in the system. I mean, the most ridiculous case I heard of that was a Christian young couple. I don't know them personally. I just heard the story secondhand. They applied for adoption, and the social worker said to them, you've got to get a reference from a gay person saying that that you're not homophobic. So that Christian couple had to find a gay person who wrote them a letter saying that they weren't homophobic. They had to jump through that ridiculous hoop. Meanwhile, councils, adoption agencies are setting up stalls in gay nightclubs to recruit people to be adoptive and foster parents. Okay, I would say, forget the gay bit, just a nightclub. Okay, people are at the nightclub stage, very possibly not going to be the ideal parents. Maybe that's unfair, but I would say in general, I would suggest that's there's a pretty strong correlation between being on the nightclub scene and not quite being at the stage of life where you're ready to look after a child. But anyway, that's that one. Do I believe gay couples should also adopt? Family party policy is priority. So being a heterosexual couple would be counted as a plus in the assessment process. So we don't say the gay couple should not be able to adopt. We don't say single people should not be able to adopt, but we're saying that being a heterosexual couple should be seen as an advantage in the process because it's approximating as closely as possible to natural family life. So that's our policy there. Right, adoption is more complex though. Couples maybe can't adopt a child from a difficult background, behavioral issues, etc. It isn't quite so simple. No, of course it's not simple. Of course there might be issues that different children for adoption might face. I'm not sure where you think I simplified that issue. What would I say to people who say the Scottish Family Party are extremists? What would I say? What do I say? More like, we get that sort of comment quite commonly. Now, extremism is an interesting word. Is there anything wrong with being an extremist? Is there anything wrong with being extremely good, or extremely charitable, or extremely concerned about homelessness, or extremely concerned about valuing human life? Are those extremes bad? No, I'd say they're extremes of goodness. Extremes of goodness are extremely good. Let's put it that way. But in our society, the word extremism tends to have connotations of they're going to come and put a bomb in your building and blow you up. That tends to be what people think of as extremists. You know, it's okay to be a Muslim, but not a Muslim extremist. And by a Muslim extremist, they might well mean a terrorist. So I think extremism, or say an animal rights extremist, what do? They go and, you know, vandalize vivisection laboratories or whatever. So extremist has developed the connotation of being a bit violent, certainly at the very least intolerant, unreasonable, or whatever. So in that sense, we're definitely not extremists. Absolutely, definitely not. But in terms of an issue where we think, you know, that there's a right and there's a wrong, we want to be as close to that right view as possible. And we want to promote and defend that view as passionately as we can. So in that case, people might regard that as extreme, but it could equally well be described as committed or passionate or whatever. And so that's the other side of it. The other thing with extremism is I think some people believe the fallacy of moderation. I don't know if you ever heard of that. It's a formal fallacy. Now, a fallacy is a form of argument that people might make, and it might sound credible, but it's actually wrong. And the fallacy of moderation goes something like this. It goes, some people believe A, some people believe C. Belief B is halfway between A and C. Therefore, belief B must be the reasonable and correct view to hold. Now, if you can see that, that's just completely wrong, isn't it? But you will often hear people making that sort of view. Oh, there's some people who are quite extreme over here. There's others quite extreme over here. We're much more reasonable. We go for the middle road. Compromise, reasonable, moderate, temperate. And it's easy. You can see why people think, oh, yeah, that seems to make sense. The middle road seems the better one. But maybe it's not. Maybe it's not. I mean, maybe C is the absolutely correct point of view. Maybe middle of the road is not good. Being at one end is absolutely correct. You've just got to assess it on a case-by-case basis. That's a great question. That's a good question. Right, where have we got to? I cannot believe time has flown past. I've hardly touched the things I've got prepared. But what have we got? All right, when were you a teacher? What was your go-to methods of dealing with problematic children? It's an interesting question. At one side, it would just be a glance. Just catch their eye, and ideally, they go, oh, they'd realize what they shouldn't be doing, and they'd stop doing it. So you sit in an assembly, and someone's just whispering to someone, and you just manage to catch their eye, and you know, that's it. They realize they've been spotted, and they stop doing it. You'd hope that in a classroom as well. If you can just catch someone's eye, make them realize that you're aware of what they're doing, and ideally, that should do the trick. That doesn't quite do the trick. You might just need to say something, or just a gesture, or just shake your head at them. And again, ideally, and a lot of the time, that would do the trick. Beyond that, you might need to say something. If it's quite a minor thing, hopefully quite sort of quickly. Don't break the flow of what you're saying. Just drop it in there, and then you'd hope that would sort the thing out. I mean, sometimes someone's done something. When I was a housemaster, I often deal with things. You know, someone's done something pretty seriously wrong, and then you've got to deal with it later on. I mean, I spent hundreds of hours sitting in my housemaster's study, talking to boys who've been up to various things, you know, bullying people or, you know, misbehaving in lessons or whatever. And I would talk about it and talk about it and talk about it. So in a sense, I was a very model of restorative practice. I was more than happy to talk about these things for as long as it takes. But on the other hand, I was also happy to let's say a teacher complained about a class. A teacher would get in touch and say, you know, I'm really a bit fed up with 3B. Someone really behaving badly. I tell them to settle down. It's just not happening. So I'd get 3B together after a house meeting, and I'd say, look, the teacher, your teacher in such and such a subject, they're really not very happy. They're a bit concerned about behavior. And I would say, I hope this is not going to become a problem that I have to deal with. I hope I'm not going to have to go back and ask for names and have to spend ages speaking to you and really sorting this out. So I hope it's not going to become an issue. And then 9 times out of 10, the next time I saw the teacher, they would say, oh, it's great. Yeah, much better, much better. That's really good. Sometimes you get someone where this is not working. So eventually you would say, okay, right, I've had enough. If you do this again, this is the punishment you're going to get. And they would get it. And if they do it again, it would go up a punishment level. I mean, sometimes someone would do something straight away. They would think, you know full well you shouldn't have been doing that. So it's quite appropriate. I'm just going to go straight away. I'm going to give you a punishment. I mean, most of the time I was working in the boarding school, I mean, the punishments went up to a Saturday night detention, a 2-hour Saturday night detention, which is quite stinging. So I think because these very effective punishments were in place, it meant that you didn't need to use them very much because things were pretty orderly and disciplined. So that would be a little snapshot to some of the things I used to do. Right. Right, just to finish very quickly, make the policy clear on smacking. Right, the policy of the Scottish Family Party is that we oppose the smacking ban. Okay, the government shouldn't have come in telling parents how to bring up their own children. And that's it. That's the end of our policy. So we're not recommending anyone do anything. We're not telling anyone they should smack their kids. We're not telling anyone they shouldn't. We're just saying it's none of the government's business. And that should be left up to parents. But we don't support corporal punishment in schools. Right, there's lots more questions coming up. But sadly, we're going to have to leave it there because that's gone incredibly quickly. So next week, watch this space. Because at some point they say we're going to make the move to Tuesday and maybe go an hour later as well. And we'll see if our very special guest can make it next week. Right. So thanks for your company this evening. Thanks for your questions and see you next time. Right, good night.